Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. We would like to ask everyone to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the program. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the program, and we will only be accepting questions and comments via the chat window. At the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or possibly the top right if you are on a different device, you should be able to see an option for chat. If you click that, it will open the chat window where you can type your questions so that they may be read aloud and answered. Thank you, and enjoy the event. Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this virtual event and presentation are solely those of the individual artists in their personal capacity and are not reflective of nor represent official policy, position, or views of New Jersey City University.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm Stephanie Chaikin. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts at NJCU. And on behalf of NJCU, in collaboration with Leotique, we are so happy to present to you today the Scalpel of Writing. Writers read Louise DeSalvo with special guest Deborah DeSalvo. I'm going to tell you about our moderators. First off, the amazing Dr. Edwidge Junta, who is the author of Writing with an Accent, Contemporary Italian-American Women Authors, and co-editor of 5 anthologies, including The Milk of Almonds and Embroidered Stories. At New Jersey City University, she is a professor of English who has trained scores of students in the art of memoir and created the first course devoted to the Triangle Fire. Her literary, nonfiction, and poetry appear in many journals and anthologies. She has been profiled in the New York Times and the Italian television RAI for her work in memoir and Italian American studies. Her book, Talking to the Girls, Intimate and Political Essays on the Triangle Fire, co-edited with Marianne Trasciatti, will be published in 2022 by New Village Press. Donia Ayoub is our favorite, and she is an NJCU graduate holding a BA in English with a concentration in creative writing. She is also a graduate of the Columbia Publishing Course, class of 2020. Donia is the editorial assistant for Pen and Brush, a women-owned and women-run nonprofit organization dedicated to showcasing the works of women and non-binary artists and writers. We have an amazing event for you today, so I'm going to turn this over to Eddie to start us off.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the generous hospitality that the center continues to provide and the opportunity to offer these events. I was thinking that I would be just thrilled to spend some time with just any one of the writers who have come here today to read Louise's work, just one of them. Give me an afternoon with one of them and I will be happy. And just to be with all of you today, my heart is really full of gratitude. And Deborah, who is joining us from Louise's house, everything seems very, very, very perfect. And also Italy and America coming together. It's a very emotional moment for me. I've been thinking about what I wanted to say today. And I've been in the company of Louise DeSalvo for many, many years. I've introduced her many times. I have written about her work. We have cooked together. We have shared meals. We have laughed. We have been at literary events and family events. And I miss her terribly. But she's very much present in my life in so many ways. And I just want to, because we talk a lot, when people talk about my work, they always talk about memoir. My memoir journey started with this, these regardless of vertigo. which arrived in my apartment in North Brunswick in 1996. And I started reading it and got in bed, and Josh Fausti, who became my husband, and my daughter was 6 years old. They didn't see me for 2 days. This book completely absorbed me in such a full way, and it changed my life. It was Louise who changed my life. And I think when you talk about Louise DeSalvo, it's very difficult to separate life from work. And I've asked each of the writers who are joining us today, and I could have invited many, many, many more, but at some point we kind of had to contain the list. I think they feel the same way. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I know many of you know intimately Louise's work. Some of you met her, and usually we do questions and comments just on chat, but once we're done with the reading, we'll actually give the audience the opportunity to unmute yourself in case you want to share your comments. Okay, but you know, as the writers read, please feel free to post any comments, any questions you may have. Okay, here we go. Jersey City, 27 September 1942. The place and date of birth of Louise DeSalvo, author whose monumental influence will continue to be assessed and recognized for years to come. Biographer of Virginia Woolf, textual scholar, editor, essayist, fiction writer, poet, and most importantly, for those of us who have been forever changed by reading works like Vertigo, Crazy in the Kitchen, and the many books on memoir she published in the last 2 decades of her life, master memoirist who understood the craft of the genre she helped to shape in fundamental ways. She showed the way to memoir not only through the example of her writing and through her extraordinary books on craft and process, but also through teaching generations of students in her mythical memoir classes at Hunter College, in undergraduate courses, and the MFA memoir program she created at Hunter. My own students at the NJCU have been forever changed by their encounter with Louise DeSalvo. Students like Margot Fragoso, who wrote about the way in which hearing Louise DeSalvo read at NJCU authorized her to tell her story in her memoir, Tiger, Tiger. Crystal Sital, author of Secrets We Kept, who became her student at Hunter. Angel Eduardo and Natasha Persaud, who were inspired by Louise to pursue a degree in memoir at Hunter. And virtually every student who read one of her works I've taught over the years. I myself have been forever changed by my encounter with Louise, as have the fellow writers and scholars who join me today. Louise studied the craft of writing with patience, determination, persistence. She understood the writing as work, hard work. And this understanding was shaped by working class origins and ethics. In a riveting exploration of the past in Vertigo, as she prepares to write of unspoken and unspeakable childhood trauma, that places, as she puts it, language cannot describe, but the body remembers, she refers to the scalpel of language as a necessary tool to try to exercise trauma, to work away the layers of memory, to reveal, to understand, to tell, to change a relationship with the past. If the past cannot be changed, Louise teaches us, memoir teaches us to change the way we look at it and transforms our relationship to trauma. Louise DeSalvo died 3 years ago in October of 2018. But the legacy of this extraordinary writer lives on in the lives and work of the writers, teachers, scholars, the students and readers who continue to learn from her, as I do, as my students do. Today, on what would have been her 79th birthday, we celebrate Louise with this event where writers from different parts of the United States, from Italy and from Ireland, have gathered to read from her work. The very fact that we could all come together from so many different places and time zones, is a testament to the love and admiration that Louise DeSalvo continues to inspire. Each of the writers here has their own Louise story. Fellow writers, translators, scholars, former students, people you knew her in person, and people who only knew her through her written words, who have all been touched by Louise DeSalvo. I want to thank the NJCU Center for the Arts, and I'm especially pleased for the collaboration with Leotique, a fabulous group of scholars and writers based in Italy that has very generously offered to co-sponsor this event and to participate with some readings in Italian. And so it is also especially meaning that we are having readings in English and Italian in this bilingual event. Louise DeSalvo saw herself as an immigrant writer, a third-generation immigrant who fully understood the cross-generational continuity of the immigrant journey and what it means to inhabit multiple cultures and multiple languages. And it seems now a perfect place to introduce a fellow Mediterranean American writer, and at one time my student Donia Yub was being my precious collaborator in so many of these events, and she will share some remarks on Louise DeSalvo. Donia?
Thank you, Eddie. I first encountered Louise DeSalvo in my memoir class of 2017. The idea of writing about my life was harrowing and left me feeling anxious after every attempt at it. Even after developing a small comfort with writing about myself, my family, privately in my class journal, I felt a sense of futility with what I was writing. These are experiences and memories I knew intimately, the memories and experiences of an Arab American Muslim woman growing up in the United States. They felt hyper-specific, non-universal. When my professor told us to read Vertigo, I approached the text as an assignment. I'll read it, create some questions for discussion. At the very least, I can take some notes on how this author structures her memoir. I was not enthusiastic or convinced. In the first chapter alone, DeSalvo wrote snippets of my own life. She wrote, quote, "Writing anything that I was doing, anything that I was feeling or thinking was dangerous in a household like mine," end quote. It disturbed me how much she knew about me without having met me. Through this moment, I learned new vocabulary that changed my perspective on memoir writing forever. Shared experience. DeSalvo and I are not of the same background or even of the same generation, yet we both experienced similar things. The following class, when we were given a writing exercise, I wrote about myself as I was instructed, privately but confidently. It is as Fatima AlSaadawi said, quote, "Very creative, Vertigo brings the past to the present and transforms pain into power and pleasure," end quote. DeSalvo was the first to show me the importance of telling one's story. She suggested that I reconsider my perspective on my own life, my writing. It is DeSalvo who first said that there was power and meaning in my voice and in my experiences. Now I must do the work of telling those stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donia, for these very, very touching remarks. You know, scholars often have very fraught relationships with the families of the writers who write about. Well, you know, it's not been my case with the DeSalvo family. Now they have become part of my extended family, and their presence in my life and the life of my family has been incredibly meaningful, and certainly also a great source of comfort since Louise has not been with us. So very, very honored to introduce my friend Deborah DeSalvo, who will read from a special passage of one of Louise's work. Yes, Crazy in the Kitchen. And thank you so much, Deborah, for being with us, and our love to the entire DeSalvo family. Unmute yourself, Deborah. We cannot hear you, Deborah.
The host wasn't allowing me. Now I'm unmuted. You guys can hear me okay? Okay, all those nods. Thank you. I appreciate the nods. Okay. It's an honor. It's beyond an honor for me to be here today. And it's overwhelming almost to see all these faces staring back. And many of you I know, many of you I don't know, but you all know Louise, whom I adored, who changed my life, not only in an academic way, but I married her son. So that was a big thing. But I met Louise back in 1989 in the summer, and we spent a summer of love together. She was one of 3 professors, and I was one of 18 students who had a course on literature in England, kind of a hands-on course. And she was the Wolf Scholar on board. And we read 3 of Virginia's novels that summer. And it was a 5-week course, but it felt like 3 months. And that was a good thing. But she and I bonded, and it was like we knew each other for years after that first greasy breakfast in the dorm. And she told me about her family. I told her about mine. We bonded so intensely. And it was a marvelous summer. And then when Jason's job didn't work out in Florida and he moved back home, he was the perfect catch, living at home, working at Ski Barn. It was just meant to be. And we married 3 years later and had 2 beautiful children who are 26 now and 22, Stephen and Julia. And actually, I'm going to read about Julia in the epilogue of Crazy in the Kitchen. I expect to cry, so bear with me. And one of the many things that Louise and I shared was not only a love of our family, but we shared a birthday. So today's my birthday too. But anyway, here is Playing the Bowl, Louise DeSalvo. You need my volume up? Everything okay? You can hear me okay? Okay. One Friday, I take my granddaughter Julia to her toddler music class. She calls the class "Oh My," because these are the first words of her favorite song, No More Pie. Oh my, no more pie. Whenever she knows she's going to oh my, she sings the first line of the song, oh my, no more pie, over and over again. When Julia sings, I hear a young voice, but there is something old about the voice, just as there is something old about the child. She is one of those children who look like they are older people locked in childish bodies, one of those children who understand. On this particular day, the teacher shows the grown-ups how to improvise musical instruments at home, how measuring spoons can be jangled, how measuring cups can be smacked against each other to produce percussive sound. See, the teacher says, picking up a cheese grater and playing it with a spoon. Use your imagination. You don't need to buy musical instruments to make music. The teacher is smiling, She's making music seem like so much fun. On this day, preoccupied with a piece of writing that has not been very much fun in the making, I am cranky. I think this is one message, that music is fun, but not the most important message. The arts, I think, aren't just fun, they're essential. They're bone, flesh, blood, sinew, soul, spirit. And art can be hard, goddamned hard, to make, to witness. But these are kids, after all. 18-month-olds, too. The teacher dumps little plastic bowls and wooden spoons onto the floor in the center of the room. Just watch the children and see what they do, she says. Plastic bowls turned upside down make perfect drums. You can let them do this at home. She turns on a recording of African drums, the rhythms insistent, intricate, energizing. The children start moving to the rhythm. They sway and stomp and jump and run. Even I start moving. One little boy dashes into the center of the circle, picks up a bowl and a spoon, turns the bowl over, starts beating it. Soon all the children are beating their improvised drums. Their improvised instruments. All that is but Julia. Julia sits in the center of the circle, flips her bowl, takes a spoon, and starts stirring. She's stirring clockwise, she's stirring counterclockwise. She's stirring as quickly as the other children are drumming. She's shaking her head and stirring. She's throwing her head back and stirring. She's stirring and tasting some more. She's closing her eyes, lost in the stirring. She's pretending to cook, as if cooking were all that mattered in this world, as if her life depended upon her cooking, as if the gods cared. And she's making waffles, sauce, matzo balls, biscotti, scones. She's making pudding, she's making pie, and she's calling out the names of what she's making, and she's tasting what she's making. So here's this little girl, this little child with a wise face, who seems to have seen all things, to remember all things. This child with her mother's face and my face, and her mother's face, and my grandmother's face, and her mother's grandmother's face, and the face of every woman in the world. And this child is stirring and cooking and singing through the celebrations, through the pogroms, invasions, bombings, evacuations, emigrations. She's stirring in Russia, in Austria-Hungary, in Puglia, in the Abruzzi, in Campania, and in Sicily. She's stirring and singing, this child who sees the future and who knows the past, who sees sorrow, sees joy, this wise, wise child who looks to the future, but who brings back the ancestors. She stirs and tastes and cooks and tastes and sings. And she sings, oh my, no more pie. Oh my, no more pie. No more pie. No more pie. Yeah. It's a beautiful piece. And it captures Julia so incredibly well. But anyway, this was such a pleasure. I thank you all, and I look forward to hearing more of Louise and sharing stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. What a way to get us started. What perfect person now to represent Louise and just read from this passage. I think we're all a little bit emotional, so it's okay. And yeah. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, and happy birthday. Deborah shared a birthday with Louise. Just remember the fabulous birthday celebration. So we celebrate you too today. I said that Louise, and that won't be the first or the last, and Deborah said it too, was deeply touched by Louise in her life. But Louise also brought people together. Sometimes, in ways that she herself did not plan. And Our next reader is someone who's very dear to me and I've known for many years and has done the almost impossible, which is to bring Vertigo in Italy. She is the translator of Vertigo, and the book exists in Italian as well. And this was such a great source of joy for Louise. So I want to welcome my friend, Katherine Romeo, extraordinary scholar. Check out her work on post-colonial Italian literature. And the work, you know, it's interesting because it started in lots of ways with studying Louise, if I may say so. And I think this passage that Deborah just read kind of explains why. Welcome, Katya.
Good evening, everybody. It's evening here. I'm in Rome, Italy. Thank you, Eddie, so much for organizing this, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really very happy to be here. I am going to read an excerpt from Vertigo, from my Italian translation of Vertigo, but specifically I'm not reading from the book, but I'm reading from this collection of Tutte Storie, which I edited with Eddie 20 years ago, Eddie, can you believe that? And this is a collection of writings by Italian-American women, which we co-edited together with Maria Rosa Cutrufelli. And this collection also includes an excerpt from a chapter in Vertigo, which in English is called is titled Combat Zones, and which I have translated Campi di Battaglia. And the reason why I'm not reading from the book, but I'm reading from this collection, is because I have a very special memory about reading this from this collection. And it was 20 years ago. We were at Casa Italiana. Eddie, I'm sure you remember that. And Louise was also there. We were presenting this collection. And I read to the audience from the same excerpt that I'm going to read today. And while I was reading, Louise was silently weeping while listening to her voice, which had gone back to Italy, her voice in the language of her family and of her ancestors. And she was deeply moved by listening to my voice reading her Combat Zones. Campi di battaglia, 1943-1945. Quando tutti i mariti che abitavano nella nostra palazzina popolare del quartiere italiano di Hoboken, New Jersey, partirono per la guerra, la geografia del posto cambiò così radicalmente che la vita stessa acquistò un sapore antico, festivo, tribale. L'anarchia ebbe la meglio e ciò fu un bene. Prima ogni famiglia se ne stava tutta chiusa in se stessa e conduceva una vita claustrofobica nella propria minuscola cella, composta da cucina, bagno e una camera. Nell'edificio c'era una quiete da anticamera mortuaria, anche se a un ascolto attento si sentivano grida e lamenti e qualche volta anche schiaffi e urla dietro le porte chiuse. I genitori e i bambini erano ammassati insieme nell'unica stanza al centro dell'appartamento. I pasti venivano consumati a ore prevedibili al tavolo della cucina. I panni si lavavano il lunedì nei lavandini della cucina su assi da bucato e si stendevano fuori ad asciugare. Prima della guerra i saluti tra le donne e i bambini venivano scambiati in modo educato e laconico, quando ci si incontrava per le scale o per la strada. Le famiglie andavano in chiesa la domenica e tutti si vestivano al meglio per mostrare quanto avrebbero voluto essere benestanti. Ma dopo che gli uomini partirono per la guerra, le donne che erano state lasciate da sole a prendersi cura delle famiglie spalancarono tutte le porte degli appartamenti e i bambini cominciarono a scalpicciare su e giù per i 5 piani di scale a tutte le ore del giorno e della notte. Le donne e i bambini gironzolavano da un appartamento all'altro senza fare complimenti e senza bisogno di inviti. I bambini giocavano insieme, negli androni, nei giardinetti interni, spazi assolutamente proibiti quando gli uomini si trovavano nelle proprie residenze. Il suono di quelle urla era per loro insopportabile dopo una lunga giornata di lavoro. I pasti venivano consumati a mo' di picnic nei posti più strani, sulle scale antincendio, nei salottini, nella cantina dove mio nonno faceva il vino per Pasqua, sui gradini di fronte all'entrata di casa o nelle cucine degli altri. L'ora di andare a letto o di fare il pisolino pomeridiano arrivava in qualsiasi momento ci si sentisse stanchi e ci si addormentava dove ci si trovava, non necessariamente ognuno nel proprio letto. Le madri facevano una capatina in chiesa mentre andavano o tornavano dal mercato, dai giardinetti, per pregare affinché i mariti tornassero a casa sani e salvi ed evitavano accuratamente le chiese la domenica. I bambini, ripensando a questi anni, si ricorderanno la piacevole sensazione di essere stati tutti pigiati in una stanzetta minuscola. Si ricorderanno di aver bevuto succo di frutta senza aver paura di versarlo. Si ricorderanno di aver leccato la glassa della torta prima che questa venisse tagliata e di non essere nemmeno stati rimproverati. Si ricorderanno come per le madri il fatto che i loro figli saltassero su e giù dal letto in qualche altro posto fosse la cosa più divertente del mondo. Sebbene le donne dicano di sentire la mancanza dei loro uomini e cercano di insegnare ai bambini a sentire la mancanza anche loro, e sebbene passino ore al giorno a scrivere resoconti della loro vita infelice e coraggiosa e di quella dei loro figli, queste donne sono molto più felici di quanto lo fossero prima della partenza dei mariti e di quanto lo saranno dopo il loro ritorno. Happy birthday, Louise.
Thank you so much, Katia. That was so beautiful. And thank you for reading from Tutte Storie and for reminding me of that beautiful evening and this image of Louise listening to her voice in Italian. And I know it was incredibly important for her, and just the way in which the circular journey of the immigrant, that being translated is a perfect return. Louise was a remarkable teacher. My own background in graduate school was in literary studies. I never took a creative writing course. And when I was a student in Italy, there were no courses in creative writing. I know that has changed. So I really owe it to Louise that I turned to memoir, and I really learned so much from her, and I continue to learn. But at some point, 10 years ago or so, I decided I wanted to take a memoir course. I just wanted to learn. It's really good to be a student, and students were here. It's really good to be a student. Those of us who are teachers, we want to be students. And so I was talking to Louise about it and said, I'm looking for a memoir course to take. She says, well, why don't you sit in my class? And I said, can I? I said, sure. She said, we can teach together. I said, I want to be your student. And so for 2 semesters, I had the privilege of sitting in this memoir class. That year, actually, a former student of mine, Crystal Sital, was a student in Louise's class. This is the way Louise DeSalvo operated, the way in which she brought and continues to bring us together. So it is my great pleasure to introduce another former student of Louise, Emily Bass, who is now in one of my writers group. So thank you, Louise. Emily.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Fall 2007, Louise's office. I am close to 15 minutes late for a 20-minute check-in session. What's going on? She asks me. She's tough. So am I. I'm doing the best I can, I say. Sit down, she says. What's going on? What's going on is that my husband's mother died less than a year ago. He is heartbroken. I am living in her house. The home does not feel like mine, nor does my time. He is often weeping. Grief does not care for writing schedules. Louise listens, talks fast. I was still late. Go to the hardware store, she says. Buy construction worker headphones. Block time on your schedule and call it a meeting. Don't let anyone cancel it for you. Write outside. Be gentle on yourself. Touch your writing every day. That's it. She will tell me later that she wasn't one of those get down on the floor with your kids and play all day parents. She isn't a get down on the floor with your weeping student teacher. Get the gear, throw your elbows, guard your time, be gentle when you can't. Now get out of my office because I have something else to do. Louise died the day before I started a research fellowship at the New York Public Library to write my first book. It is inadequate comfort to any of us, especially her family, who wish for the knitting, walking, writing, cooking, loving, living woman. But I mean it very literally when I say that I wrote with her beside me every day. In the acknowledgments of my first book, I say this: Louise DeSalvo taught me how to have a writing life, which is to say, she taught me how to be alive. I ran late that day. I'm so lucky I made it on time. What I'm going to read from is a chapter called Routine from The Art of Slow Writing. It is practical. It is also, to me, scriptural. And I think that's one of Louise's arts, is that the simple art need not be ornate. In fact, it often isn't, to have the power of prayer and hymn and song. This is from The Art of Slow Writing. When I started to write, I was raising 2 toddlers, teaching full-time, dealing with health issues, caring for aging parents, running a household. My husband shopped, cleaned, took care of household maintenance, and co-parented. I tried to write 2 hours a day when I could, less when I couldn't, but I tried to write every day, no matter what. I wrote when my children were napping or later when they attended school. Many parents squander that precious time on household tasks. Instead, I did laundry, shopped, and cooked when my children were around. I recently spoke with a writer trying to finish a book who was miserable because she said she couldn't write. I yell at my kids all the time, she said. I need to write, I want to write, but I can't find time to write. You don't find time to write, I said. You make time to write. She could write when her children were at school, organize caregivers to trade kids off a few hours each day, write when her kids were home by giving them quiet time in their rooms instead of trying to keep them amused. Early in my writing life, a mentor advised me that if you want to write, you have to give something up. Otherwise, you have to give up often, you have to give up a great deal. He said that everything we do, we've chosen to do, and everything we choose to do means there's something we've chosen not to do. All too often, aspiring writers choose to give up writing. My mentor said it's important to say, I'm choosing to do the laundry instead of writing, instead of saying, I don't have time to write. Jeffrey Eugenides has said that in order to write, he's had to sacrifice things I can get along without, a frisky social life, for example. I protect my writing time. I don't engage in long telephone conversations, lunches with people I don't love, most meetings, Facebook, net surfing, emailing more than once a day, shopping for the sake of shopping, boozy nights out, television, except for movies, most parties, readings. When my children were small, I didn't bake for sales, attend every game they played, drive them places. They rode their bikes or used skateboards. Most beginning writers I work with are far busier than they realize. They're shocked when they learn how little time they have to write. They learn they must not waste the time they do have. If we want to write, we must actively choose how we spend our time rather than assume that writing time will magically come our way. Still, if we wait for the perfect time to write, we'll never write. I have some guiding principles I've evolved over the years. Establish a simple routine. Be realistic. Touch the work every day. Give yourself the gift of uninterrupted time. Without a simple routine, each new writing day can become an existential dilemma that takes an enormous amount of energy away from our writing. The time we take deciding when to write, whether we're up to writing, or whether we should do something else is time wasted. If we develop a routine that permits slow, steady accomplishments, we won't waste time and energy rethinking our routine every day. Thank you for that, Louise, and thank you for the chance to share it with all of you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think that's, that book, The Art of Slow Writing, is such a gift to writers at all stages of their work. The prayers we need to recite every day. Thank you so much for reading that incredible passage. And that was one of the many things that was extraordinary about Louise. Not only she wrote, but she really showed the way how to get the work done. And we continue to learn. We need to continue to relearn the lesson every day. So many of the writers that were here knew Louise, read Louise, and some have come to know Louise's work more recently. And I am delighted by the exchanges that generates. And so when I said that Louise's legacy lives on, I mean it quite literally in the vibrant conversations and exchanges and responses that her work continues to generate. And in the spirit, I am delighted to welcome my friend Christine Grimaldi, who is a political journalist, is creative nonfiction writer, wears many hats, and today she will be sharing a reading from Dr. Louise DeSalvo. Christine?
Thanks, Eddie. I prepared a few words. I first encountered Louise DeSalvo's work in Jennifer Guglielmo's anthology, Are Italians White? How Race is Made in America. Louise wrote about racist immigration laws that coded her grandmother as a racially suspect dark white on immigration forms into the 1940s. And I wove that into an essay I wrote about Paisano of Shame Italian Americans who support Donald Trump, Paisano of Shame, POS. That essay introduced me to Eddie, who recommended more of Louise's work. I already admired Louise's politics. I never expected to see so much of myself in her. Louise writes about her feminism, her depression, her fear that she'd be constricted and constrained by the circumstances of her birth into an Italian American family from New Jersey. These are all experiences that I could relate to, and that often left me feeling alienated in both my family and my community. Reading Louise makes me feel comfortable as myself, and it also connects me to an overlapping community, or communities rather, of Italian Americans writers with shared values and goals. I'm just really thrilled to get to know her and to feel more comfortable in my skin and connect with other writers. So I'll read from Vertigo now. I have read somewhere that the opposite of depression is not happiness, but vitality. Somehow knowing this helps me. Inscribed on a note card, the saying is tacked above my desk. It has become an avatar to staunch my chronic terror, which only dissipates the moment that I settle myself into reading and note-taking, the moment that I put pen to paper, the moment that I tap out sentences, no matter how ragged or incomprehensible, on a keyboard. Knowing that the opposite of depression is vitality serves as a reminder that, for me, no matter how difficult, the act of turning toward whatever causes my pain, of reading about it in works of literature, and of trying to find the words to describe it, helps me modulate the feeling that I am in the middle of a vortex of events that is sucking me under and threatening to overwhelm me. Once, a long time ago, when as a teenager I see Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, I understand that, like the hero played by Jimmy Stewart, I too suffer from vertigo. I looked the word up in the dictionary that was my parents' gift to me the previous Christmas. Vertigo, noun, a disordered condition in which one feels oneself or one's surroundings whirling about. 2, the dizzying sensation caused by this. 3, a disease marked by vertigo. Because I have taken Latin in junior high school, I am curious about the derivation of this word that so accurately describes a condition I suffer from, which they call a disease. And so I read on. Vertigo. Derived from the Latin vertigo, whirling movement, dizziness equals vertere, to turn, see verse, plus ego, noun suffix. I have been trained well in dictionary skills by the nuns in my Catholic grammar school. I know how to use it to nail down the precise meanings of words I encounter in my reading, to learn their histories, to explore their roots and derivations. The entry says see verse, and so I turn to the entry for verse. I know that the word has something to do with poetry, but will it tell me more? Verse, noun, verb. One of the lines of a poem. Two, to versify, that is to turn a phrase. Nothing new here, but what about the word's derivation? Verse, derived from Latin versus, a row, literally a turning toward, equals vertere, to turn, plus tus, suffix of verb of action, akin to ward, worth. I ponder the differences. Vertigo, dizziness, an endless turning. Verse, an act of turning toward, something linked to the word worth. Vertigo, verse, the one then the other, the one or the other. These words through the years have become linked for me at a very deep level. To turn a phrase in the midst of my instability, by versifying to transmute my instability, my vertigo into something that is worthwhile. At an earlier point in my life, I had imagined that one day I would have the difficult emotional work behind me, and that I would know once and for all the secrets of serenity, that my vertiginous self would be conquered, that my instability would be behind me. Now, though, I am beginning to see that the act of understanding is a lifelong, ongoing, shape-shifting process, one that is never over, one that I have to enact as often as I am able, one that I must try to enact, especially when I feel I am unable, which when meaning seems too elusive to grasp. And understanding for me means reading, means writing about what I read, and now finally writing about myself.
Thank you so much, Christine, and I look forward to more conversations about Louise. So we have interspersed the Italian readings, and I think it's not just to have some variety, but I think that really captures what it means to inhabit multiple cultures and multiple languages. Those languages that really live next to each other. I am so honored and so grateful that Leotique has agreed to co-host this event and for the beautiful gesture of reading from Louise's work. So I want to introduce Viviana Fiorentino, and she and Valentina De Cesare will do the first set of readings in Italian, and Viviana will tell us a little bit about Leotique. Welcome, Viviana.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Hi, everyone. And on behalf of Leotique, I would like to thank the Vice Giunta for having invited us in such an important event. Leotique is an Italian initiative that aims at revoicing forgotten women artists. Unfortunately, many Italo-American women writers have been forgotten or ignored or scarcely translated in Italian because of a literature canon not fitting with being a woman plus Italo-American. Tonight, we are delighted to read from Louise DeSalvo's work, Vertigo in Italian, published by the independent Italian press, Nutrimenti, in the beautiful translation by Katherine Romeo. Leotique, who are reading tonight, are myself, Valentina Di Cesare, who founded the Observatory of Italian American Literature and Culture in Italy, Alessandra Trevisan, and Chiara Pini. I'm delighted to read from the chapter Fixing Things in Italian. Mettere a posto le cose. Diversamente da Virginia Woolf, alla quale avevano insegnato già da molto giovane che gli eventi della sua vita e i suoi pensieri erano significativi e che valeva la pena registrarli, la mia esperienza di donna italo-americana con genitori di origine proletaria è stata molto differente. La scrittura di un diario non veniva certo incoraggiata dalla mia famiglia. Nonostante avessi scribacchiato da bambina, durante l'adolescenza non avevo mai tenuto un vero e proprio diario. Scrivere di tutto ciò che facevo, di tutto ciò che sentivo o pensavo, era pericoloso in una famiglia come la mia, nella quale non c'era alcun diritto alla riservatezza, nella quale il contenuto dei cassetti di una scrivania veniva regolarmente frugato e ispezionato. Apparentemente era rischioso anche per Virginia Woolf. Ho notato che il diario che teneva a 16 anni aveva un lucchetto e una chiave, e anche che lei incollava le pagine di un altro diario tra le pagine di un libro che aveva comprato espressamente per quel motivo, Right Use of Reason, del dottor Isaac Watts, per nasconderle agli occhi curiosi dei suoi familiari. Osservare queste cose nella vita di Virginia Woolf mi aiuta a comprendere quanto da adolescente avessi bisogno di riservatezza e come questo bisogno fosse costantemente contrastato. Mentre scrivo, penso che il mio diario agisca un po' come un fissante, come in fotografia, come il prodotto chimico che si usa per fissare un'immagine, per renderla permanente. Ma comincio anche a vedere che gli altri significati della parola fixer valgono per ciò che scrivo. Uso il mio diario, la mia scrittura, per far andare meglio le cose, per metterle a posto, per guarire e anche per misurare e registrare quello che mi succede, per vedere dove sono, per stabilire una linea da seguire per il futuro. Anche il lavoro intellettuale, l'ho sempre saputo, fa andare tutto meglio per me. Pensare ai romanzi mi ha sempre aiutato ad affrontare i problemi della vita. Valentina thanks.
Nell'estate del 1956 ho 13 anni. Sono seduta sul marciapiede fuori dalla porta di casa a parlare di libri con i miei amici del cuore, Freddy e Susan. È importante che ciò che diventerà il lavoro della mia vita, studiare la creatività letteraria, studiare la relazione tra la vita degli scrittori e il loro lavoro, e anche il nostro come lettori, non sia altro che un'estensione di queste conversazioni della mia fanciullezza. Penso alle opportunità che i giovani perdono quando interpretano il mondo attraverso la televisione, i film, quando non si impegnano, come facevamo noi, in conversazioni difficili, dolorose, su quello che leggiamo e sul rapporto tra la nostra vita e ciò che leggiamo. A questo punto ognuno di noi ragazzi ha scoperto che le soffitte di casa e gli armadi degli scantinati sono a volte, anche se non sempre, luoghi sicuri in cui nascondersi per stare alla larga dalla rabbia dei genitori. Tutti noi abbiamo vissuto anni di separazione da nostro padre durante la Seconda Guerra Mondiale, anni in cui nostra madre era terrorizzata in tempo di guerra. Fino a questo momento, per quanto ne sappiamo, siamo un gruppo di adolescenti per nulla straordinari. Siamo sopravvissuti alla morte di alcuni familiari. Il nonno di Freddy è morto, anche il mio. Anche la mamma di Susan e altri 5 membri della famiglia sono morti in un terribile incidente stradale che ha impresso nel nostro cervello l'immagine dei corpi carbonizzati attraverso le fotografie sulle prime pagine dei giornali. E di recente siamo rimasti sconvolti per il suicidio della mamma di un'amica che, ci dicono, si è impiccata legando una corda al pomello della porta, facendola passare sopra la porta e poi dando un calcio alla sedia su cui stava in piedi. Mia sorella in particolare è affascinata da questa morte, vuole sentirne i particolari in continuazione, anche se io vorrei che i miei amici non ne parlassero così tanto. Io voglio parlare di addio alle armi e del fatto che sto cercando di capire che cosa voglia dire essere in guerra, una cosa che mio padre ha vissuto ma di cui non parla mai. Voglio parlare del romanzo L'albero della vita, che mi terrorizza a tal punto che non riesco a tenerlo in camera mia quando vado a dormire la sera. Molti anni più tardi conosco il figlio dell'autore e vengo a sapere che l'autore si è suicidato. Seduti sul marciapiede mentre facciamo scoppiare le bolle di catrame con le scarpe da ginnastica e facciamo un sacco di rumore, succhiando dei ghiaccioli che si sciolgono velocemente, mentre parliamo della madre della nostra amica e alla fine anche dei libri che stiamo leggendo. Mentre il caldo seducente induce sonnolenza e crea complicità, io scopro di aver vissuto le stesse cose degli eroi e delle eroine di questi romanzi. Parlare di questi libri mi conferma che i sentimenti contro cui ho lottato da sola, nello spazio solitario della mia sofferenza privata, sono condivisi da altre persone, che io sono abbastanza forte e ho abbastanza capacità di recupero da sopportare le difficoltà e che sono abbastanza robusta per continuare a resistere e per uscirne vincitrice, che ho già resistito e ne sono già uscita vincitrice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for these heartfelt readings. It's just so incredible to hear, to read the Louise in Italian and also to hear Louise in your voices. So thank you so much. Our next reader spent just a couple of years, a little bit longer, with me in this office space, putting together a book, a collection of essays called Personal Effects, which is a collection of essays on the work of Louise. And I'm really glad we were able to offer this book in very small recognition of an incredibly influential role in the lives and works of so many. So Nancy Caronia, she will be reading from a lesser known work of Louise, and probably Nancy, she will tell her the story, her novel Casting Off. So welcome, Nancy. So good, so glad to see you.
Great. Grazie, Ede. And thank you to everybody. It's wonderful to be together, even through Zoom. I'm actually going to read a little bit from the introduction to Casting Off, and then I'll read a little bit of Casting Off, but I just want to read like a paragraph rather than speak off the cuff. It says, most readers and scholars, and I wrote this introduction, most readers and scholars know Louise DeSalvo through her groundbreaking work as a Virginia Woolf scholar and an Italian-American memoirist. Few readers in Italian-American, American, or British literature studies are aware that DeSalvo completed a novel before she worked on her controversial biography, Virginia Woolf, The Impact of Childhood Sexual Abuse on Her Life and Work. And almost 12 years before Vertigo, her memoir set in New Jersey on growing up in a working class Italian immigrant family. Fewer still know that this novel, Casting Off, was published in the UK, but never in the United States. And what I have here that I'm showing you is the UK print of this from 1987. I sort of love this picture of this woman with the scarf and the glasses. And it took until 2014 before what I'm holding in my hands was reprinted in the United States by Bordighera Press. And here in some of Louise's words in my introduction are the reasons why she thinks it was not printed in the United States. In the mid-1980s, as DeSalvo was seeking publication for her first completed novel, US editors agreed that, as she conceived and wrote it, Casting Off was immoral, perverse, and totally unrealistic. That's what she told me, and then also what she wrote in her book, Adultery. Editor after editor was outraged by DeSalvo's fashioning of female characters who were married and polygamous without being discovered. They didn't care or believe that DeSalvo's narrative, grounded in extended research, offered a realistic depiction of women's thoughts and actions regarding monogamy and marriage. As DeSalvo put it, while women were more horrified than men, no editor could fathom how Helen and Maeve would not feel guilty or be punished for their seeming infidelities. And I want to read a short piece from this that's about this kind of lens of women's sexuality through a woman's perspective. And I also want to read this piece because in it is the seeds of the things that have always been important to Louise as a writer: objects and relationships and art. The character of Helen, who's having the affair with the younger Julian. Julian is a photographer, and part of the reason why she's attracted to him is because he's an artist. And she is living this suburban housewife life that has no art in it. And through him, she connects back to her art. But I'm going to read this scene. Helen stood in Julian's kitchen, stark naked, opening shelves and cupboards at random, glancing through the doorway to the shower where he was washing himself and singing in an off-key, high-pitched baritone to make sure he wasn't watching her. She thought she might whip up something simple and special to surprise him by the time he finished showering and shaving. The easy little treats she liked to pop before James, as if they appeared from nowhere by magic. Pita bread and hummus, or onion bread with cheese and fresh tomatoes quickly run under the broiler until the cheese just began to bubble. She smiled, thinking this was the first time she'd ever been naked in someone else's kitchen. She was hoping to find some tuna fish she could mix with a little mayonnaise and curry powder. Everyone kept a can of tuna fish in their cupboard just in case. But there was nothing in this kitchen, absolutely nothing to make a decent snack. She opened the cabinet under the sink and passed her hands over yet another series of dust-covered bottles: oil, peanut butter, Lavorus mouthwash. But when she saw the boxes upon boxes of macaroni and cheese, she began to cry, thinking that here was this boy, really, if the truth were told, whose body from the back was indistinguishable from the teenager she'd left brooding in his room at home, listening to The Who, or was it the Talking Heads? They all sounded alike to her. Who she was sure had never made himself a decent home-cooked meal. She thought about putting her clothes back on and going out and finding a supermarket. She would buy him basmati rice. She wanted to make him home fries, chicken teriyaki. She wanted to make him dumplings from scratch, the real homemade kind. She wanted to make him fried things, stews, London broil, leg of lamb, braised veal, potted pork. But before she could even crawl out from under his sink, he grabbed her from behind and pushed his pelvis into her backside so hard she almost fell into the shelf that seemed reserved for his private supply of Fritos. Nothing to eat in this house, she told him, licking the tears from the corner of her mouth. Oh, Julian, how do you manage? There's nothing to eat here. Oh, yes, there is. And he pointed to his cock that was starting to do what cocks do when they encounter naked women in the kitchen rummaging through cupboards. Oh no, she said, pulling her hand away from where he was pushing it. I can't anymore, Julian. You're younger than I am. I can't do it again, Julian. I'll die if I do it again. I'll just die, Julian, please. But he was licking her eyelids and the corners of her eyes, and it was pointless, really, to argue. And besides, the supermarket was probably closed by this time anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. You know, just the multifaceted Louise DeSalvo. We get everything reading Louise. I think it was wonderful reading. So before The Art of Love Writing, there was another book, Writing as a Way of Healing, a book that I continue to recommend to anyone who says, I have to stop writing because it just triggers me, reawakens all my trauma. And Writing as a Way of Healing is really a guide to navigate the trauma through writing. So Donia, you will read an excerpt from Writing as a Way of Healing.
Thank you, Eddie. I will be reading from chapter 6, Caring for Ourselves as We Write, because as Eddie just said, and as DeSalvo mentions in her works, that navigating trauma takes a lot. And of course, we have to take care of ourselves in the process of that. Before I began writing, I had learned what I needed to do to write without precipitating an emotional crisis. I knew now that to take risks on the page without endangering ourselves, we must do so from a position of relative emotional safety. I prepared to do the work, and as I worked, I continued caring for myself. I asked myself, what must I do to write this essay and enjoy the process of doing it, though I'll be working with difficult emotional material? Before writing, I read about how other writers had described the death of a loved one. I read general works about grief, loss, and dying so I could remind myself that others too had shared my experience. I made sure I didn't focus exclusively on my loss. I wanted to learn how others rebuilt their lives. Doing this helped my work too, for as I read, I noticed style, imagery, form, structure. I learned how best to describe feelings, how to use dialogue, how to depict people, events, and places. Focusing on aesthetics provided a welcomed distraction. I always had emotional support available. I checked in with my writer friends weekly, sometimes daily, and I was in therapy while writing, which helped integrate the difficult and shameful feelings my writing was unearthing. I wrote in my journal too about the positive aspects of my life to maintain my perspective while I worked. At the time, I was reading Anthony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within, and was greatly influenced by this work. Robbins made many valuable suggestions I embraced about managing difficult feelings. Adapting one of Robbins' practices, I began to write about what I was happy about in my work, what I was excited by, proud of, grateful for, enjoying most, committed to, learning, and giving, sharing. So though I was writing about pain, my journal acted as a welcome respite and necessary balance. These insights eventually found their way into my memoir. Writing about my sister's death helped me begin to mourn her loss and to understand much about our family history of depression and its consequences. Though I had lost Jill, I felt I had regained something of her by writing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was beautiful. And now Valentina Di Cesare from Leotique will read from another part of Vertigo.
Il suicidio di mia sorella. Inizio estate 1993. Lo scantinato di casa mia è un casino totale ormai da anni. Quando si risposa dopo la morte di mia madre, mio padre vende la casa nella quale sono cresciuta e la maggior parte dei mobili, eccetto 3 pezzi che prendo io. Impacchetta i ricordi della nostra famiglia e mi dice che se io non li voglio, lui se ne sbarazzerà. Sono furiosa che abbia scelto di portare con sé molto poco della sua vita precedente, vestiti, attrezzi, qualche foto di mia madre, ma neanche una della mia famiglia o di me, di mia sorella, nella sua nuova vita felice, anche se in parte lo capisco. Gli ultimi anni non sono stati piacevoli per lui. Il suicidio di mia sorella, la depressione di mia madre, la sua terribile, inspiegabile malattia terminale. Ho la sensazione che voglia lasciarsi alle spalle tutto ciò che gli ricorda quegli anni. Io farei lo stesso. Gli dico che prenderò tutto io, guarderò quello che c'è nelle scatole e deciderò che cosa tenere, che cosa dar via e che cosa buttare. Mio padre va in Florida a sposarsi, dico alla mia amica Kate, e lascia a me ad occuparmi di tutta la sua merda. Lo dico come se lui mi avesse obbligato a prendermi tutti questi scarti. Invece no, sono io che me li prendo, perché non posso sopportare l'idea che queste scatole vengano buttate su una pila di spazzatura nella discarica comunale. Mi prenderò quello che voglio, butterò il resto. Lo farò immediatamente. Ma questo succedeva 3 anni fa. Tutte le mattine, quando vado di sotto per lavare un carico di biancheria, un rituale che mi aiuta a pensare a quello che scriverò quel giorno, oltrepasso la pila di scatoloni. Penso che un giorno o l'altro troverò il tempo per guardare che cosa c'è dentro e per scegliere quello che voglio tenere. Lo farò di sicuro, ma oggi proprio mi manca il tempo, o l'energia, o il coraggio. Pulire lo scantinato. Queste parole sono comparse su centinaia di liste di cose da fare. Oggi mi devo occupare delle cose di sotto, dico a mio marito mentre prendiamo il caffè, quasi ogni mattina. Usando una studiata irriverenza per mascherare le mie paure e i miei sentimenti, Ho cominciato a riferirmi alle scatole di sotto come la roba della morte di mia madre. Una volta che ho sistemato la roba della morte di mia madre, gli dico, possiamo mettere lì la cyclette, comprare dei pesi, mettere la moquette per terra, trasformare lo scantinato in una palestra. Ciò che mi ha impedito di pulire lo scantinato, lo so, sono i 3 scatoloni con su scritto il nome di mia sorella, Jill, nella grafia malapena leggibile degli ultimi mesi di vita di mia madre. Non è che mi aspetti all'apertura di questa scatola di trovare documenti, lettere o diari di mia sorella che spieghino le ragioni per cui si è suicidata circa 7 anni fa. Conosco mia madre fin troppo bene. Se fossero esistiti, lei li avrebbe distrutti. Ciò che troverò e che per me sarà penoso vedere sono i pochi futili oggetti che mia madre ha scelto di conservare nei 37 anni di vita di mia sorella. Gli oggetti che mi diranno che cos'è di mia sorella che mia madre vuole ricordare. Quando permetto a me stessa di ricordare Jill, la vedo sempre in abiti da lavoro, nella sua casa di campagna nel nord-ovest sulla costa del Pacifico o nel giardino della piccola casa dove lei e suo marito hanno vissuto per un anno su un'isola costiera quando lui stava facendo il dottorato. Lì la tensione del matrimonio aveva già cominciato a farsi vedere. Lei mi scriveva spesso del fatto che provava e non riusciva a fare contento il marito e a guadagnarsi la sua approvazione, che avrebbe voluto avere un lavoro suo importante e che pagasse bene, così sarebbe riuscita ad avere più rispetto per se stessa, ma che non sapeva che cosa potesse fare, dal momento che la sua passione per la ceramica non le permetteva di guadagnare quasi nulla. Mi scriveva di giorni in cui non riusciva a trovare l'energia sufficiente per alzarsi la mattina, nonostante insistesse a fare il pane da sola e a coltivare l'orto per limitare le spese. Vedo Jill piegata sulla ruota per modellare la ceramica, i capelli lunghi color miele che le coprono il viso. Vedo le sue mani rosse come la carne cruda per il lavoro con la creta, dita ruvide, forti, mani da lavoratrice, le mani di mio padre. Vedo le mani di mia sorella che sistemano delicate teiere nella fornace, che accendono il fuoco, che raccolgono la verdura, che danno da mangiare ai tanti animali che ha, cani, gatti e una volta un maiale. Ricordare le mani di mia sorella al lavoro è più difficile che ricordare ogni altra cosa di lei.
Thank you, Valentina. That was so deeply moving.
Thank you.
I'm just so, my heart is so full just listening to all of you and just really feeling Louise's presence, rich presence with us through her words. The next two readers, I had the pleasure to work with them and Nancy on personal effects, and they wrote these extraordinary essays. You really cannot fully understand Louise DeSalvo. I was about to say Virginia Woolf, which actually you cannot really fully understand Virginia Woolf if you don't study Louise DeSalvo. That's a better way to put it. But Virginia Woolf played a key role in the work of Louise DeSalvo, not only because she wrote the biography, but if you read Vertigo, you know that the writer, in reading the writer, mapped out so much for her. So I'm especially pleased that we have a book scholar, Benjamin Hagen, who will read from Louise's work on both. Ben, welcome.
Thank you so much. This has been an incredible pleasure and privilege to hear all of you read. I feel a bit somewhat out of place since I don't consider myself much of an artist, but a scholar. But I think what mattered and continues to matter so much to me about Louise as a scholar is that she brought her understanding as an artist to her study and reading of fiction. She could read it and study it in a way that I think very few Woolf scholars still can, even to this day, given that most of us don't write novels and most of us don't write memoir. I never had the opportunity or the chance to meet her personally, but I got to know her partly through doing my PhD exams and reading her scholarship on Woolf. And then also got to know a bit more about her, partly because Nancy and I were part of the same cohort, a PhD cohort at the University of Rhode Island. And so it was through that somewhat accidental connection that I came to work with her and Adi on the personal effects collection. I could say a lot more about her scholarship, but I'll stop there. I'm going to read from the biography that's been mentioned a few times, a few paragraphs from the epilogue to that work. Virginia Woolf did not complete a major work of fiction until after Leslie Stephen's death in 1904. Leslie was her father. And until she and Vanessa established a household of their own in Bloomsbury. Her life became difficult as she struggled to grapple with the aftermath of her father's death. She fell victim to despair and depression, and then attempted suicide. Like many other victims of sexual abuse, she was sent out of her home to recover, and so lost her father, her sanity, and her home in rapid succession. During this time, Virginia Woolf was cared for by Violet Dickinson, who quite literally saved her life by offering her maternal care and protection and a respite from the abuse that she had lived with up to this time. When Woolf described her time with Violet Dickinson in a work that she wrote after her recovery, The Magic Garden, she described an idyllic world without men, where peace, freedom, joy, sisterhood, and sensuality reigned. There were gigantic women reclining on lounges, helping themselves to, quote, strawberries and cream, as though they looked upon a vision of a jocund world, end quote. There were women like flowers, whose voices, quote, chimed like petals floating and kissing in the air, end quote. What made this tranquil scene possible was the fact that Violet's listless eye would grow attentive if anything threatened this tranquility. Inside Violet Dickinson's home, Virginia Woolf learned some precious lessons. As Virginia herself put it, quote, Violet's cottage stood for a symbol of many things, end quote. One was that not every household was filled with violence and sexual abuse, and that the protection of young women was indeed possible, although she had the insight to understand that Violet was protective because Violet was independent. Another was that Violet preferred to build her own house with her own hands, quote, to living in a house built for you by others, end quote, which symbolized to Woolf that it was indeed possible to think about the kind of psychic space you yourself wanted to inhabit, which meant that it was necessary to reject those patterns of behavior erected by others. This meant asking detailed questions about the very structure of the system. It meant taking nothing for granted. As Violet asked questions about drainage and plumbing, so too would Woolf have to ask her own questions about the edifice that she inhabited. This, she wrote, quote, was the beginning of revolution, end quote. Finding out how the houses of the fathers were built, upon what foundations they were erected. Violet taught her that no one could find out these things for her, nor could she trust any of the old answers. Like Violet, she had to find out for herself, for, quote, no one could tell her how the drains were managed, for no one remembered that there were drains, end quote. And so Virginia Woolf began. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. So important to listen to these words, to read these words, and they really give us such another layer, another context to fully understand the work of memoir that Louise will go on to do. You know, it's an epilogue and it's a prologue in lots of ways. Thank you so much. Julia Shukis, I remember still looking for writers who were writing about Louise DeSalvo and stumbling upon her piece and then writing to her and telling Nancy very excited, look, I found someone who's writing about Louise. And she will be reading from one of those early pieces, the portrait of the Puttana, as a middle-aged Wolf scholar. And I think the way in which Julia has written about Louise, it really illustrates the way in which reading and writing paves the ways for friendship and how it keeps doing that, even in the relationships that exist today among all of us. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Yeah, I think one of the interesting thing, sort of one of the best gifts that Louise DeSalvo gave me, besides her work, is this network of amazing writers, and especially women who have entered my life through her work. So I got to know Eddie through her, and Nancy, and Josh through Eddie, and this sort of amazing, and even Mary Capello sort of peripherally. So it's been a great discovery and a beautiful sort of formation of community for me. So I am similar to Ben in the sense that I never met Louise in person. I'm a very solitary writer. I was living in Montreal in 2006, 2007, and I was a new mother. And I was a new mother with big dreams of writing. And I'd hit a place in my life where I was frustrated, where the work was not happening anymore. And I was looking for, and I was filled with rage. I was a very angry young mother, and I wanted to find a way back to my writing. So as with most things in my life, when I have a problem, I go to the library. So that's what I did. I handed the baby to my husband, and I tromped through the snow, the early spring snow of Montreal, and I went to McGill, to the library, to the stacks, in search of mentors, in search of advice, and in search of models. I was looking for someone who could teach me how to be a mother and a writer, how to make this painful transition from scholar to writer. And that was the day that I discovered Louise DeSalvo. I discovered her in between the covers of a book called Between Women. It's called Between Women: Biographers, Novelists, Critics, Teachers, and Artists Write About Their Work on Women. And I opened to this book to find this essay. And in Louise, I found a kindred spirit. I found someone who, as I was writing from an immigrant background, first generation, first person in my family ever to sort of have the audacity to write, or to dare to try and enter, to build a life, an intellectual life, an artistic life. I also found somebody who had walked this path of loving a child and loving one's work before me, and of giving myself over to my work in ways that honored both my life as a woman and also honored the life of my boy, of my child. So this is the essay that Louise gave me that day, and that sort of ended up laying the groundwork for me. It's an essay that I teach still to my undergraduates. It's also an essay that I share with scholars who are embarking on that difficult transition, trying to turn them into some version of an artist. The essay is called A Portrait of the Puttana as a Middle-Aged Wolf Scholar. The year is 1975. I'm 32 years old, married, the mother of 2 small children, a PhD candidate, on a charter flight to England with a friend to do research on Virginia Woolf at the University of Sussex in Falmer. This is the first time in my whole life that I'm going away by myself. I have no idea where Falmer is, except that it is near Brighton. We have no hotel reservations. We have no idea how we will get to Brighton. But we are gloriously drunk on our 3rd sherry, free from the responsibility of our children for a while. We have already had enough sherry so that each child will have her or his own little sherry bottle as a souvenir when we return home. We are, at long last, grown-ups, going to do real research, the next generation of wolf scholars in incubation. We are formidable. I come from a family, from a cultural heritage where women simply don't go away to do things separately from men. That is not to say that men don't go away to do things separately from women. They do, and often. But in the land of my forebears, women sit around and wait for their men, or they work very hard and watch their children and wait for their men. Or they make a sumptuous meal and they work very hard and watch their children and wait for their men. But they don't go anywhere without their men, or do anything for themselves alone with their men, except complain to their children or to anyone else who will listen to them about their men and about their bad luck in having been born female. A few years ago, I decided, like everyone else, to explore my ethnic roots. It lasted a very short time. I bought a pasta machine, learned how to combine the ingredients for pasta, roll out the dough, and cut it. Word got out that I was a terrific pasta maker. Then I began to realize that you could tell how enslaved the women of any country are by the kind of preparation their traditional foods require. Just an aside, this part in this essay really spoke to me because Lithuanian foods, my family's Lithuanian, are incredibly labor intensive. Any recipe that begins, take a mortar and pestle, now drives me into a feminist frenzy. Well, pasta making is something like that. Women who really care about their families make it fresh every day. Purists insist that if the sacred pasta dough is touched by metal pasta machines, i.e. 20th century labor-saving devices, it becomes slightly slippery, a quality in pasta that is akin to infidelity in wives. Oh yes, I now remember what women who do anything without their husbands are called: putana, whores. I remember hearing stories in my childhood about how women like that were stoned to death in the old country. Well, given a background like that, you can imagine the way I felt as we flew high above the Atlantic. There I was, a putana, alone at last. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ilya. I never ever get tired of rereading the essay. We should say thank you to Ernie DeSalvo, because after Louise wrote this essay, she just tore it to pieces. She just thought it was something she shouldn't have done, and then Ernie rescued it, and it was pieced together, and then it would lead to much greater things. So we welcome back Leotique. Alessandra Trevisan and Chiara Pini will be reading from Vertigo, and then
Eddie, you're muted.
have I been muted this whole time?
No, just for like a couple seconds.
Okay, so I just posted the link to Leotique, so please check it out. It's an incredible group, and I hope that today will generate more connection, more bridges. So Alessandra Trevisan and Chiara Pini, welcome.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm reading from the same chapter Valentina read before. My sister's suicide. Estate 1983. Mia sorella vive sulla costa occidentale degli Stati Uniti. Il suo matrimonio è finito da tempo. La sua relazione più recente è terminata e lei comincia a dare di matto, come scrivo nel mio diario. Vuole vendere la casa e trasferirsi di nuovo sulla costa orientale. Non ho motivo per rimanere qui, ci dice. Sono preoccupata per lei. Io e mio marito le offriamo aiuto. Le troveremo un appartamento. Potrebbe lavorare nella società farmaceutica di mio marito e prendersi un po' di tempo per sistemare le cose. Quando mia sorella comincia a crollare, io comincio a notare e ad annotare nel mio diario i disastri di cui leggo sul giornale o di cui sento parlare alla radio. Gente ferita, crollato soffitto di un grande magazzino. Gente ferita, Qualcuno li ha cosparsi di benzina in un supermercato e gli ha dato fuoco, scrivo. I miei figli cominciano a chiamarmi Pad, preallarme, a distanza. Agosto 1983. Jill si è trasferita qui dall'Ovest, annoto, e non va poi così male come pensavo. Continuo a tenerla occupata e ad aiutarla. Senza ascoltare il mio consiglio e senza motivo, Jill ha un sacco di soldi che ha ottenuto dalla vendita della casa. Jill è andata ad abitare a casa dei nostri genitori. Una ricetta infallibile per un disastro, dico a mio marito. Dicembre 1983.
Arrivo. Alessandra, non mi permetteva di attivare l'audio. Sorry, I couldn't turn the audio on. Ok. Dicembre 1983. Da quando è arrivata mia sorella, la mia vita è un disastro. Numerose telefonate al giorno, da mia madre, da mio padre e da Jill. Mia madre che insiste che dovrei coinvolgere Jill nella mia vita. Portarla con me quando vado a nuotare, invitarla a pranzo da me. Mia sorella che si lamenta dei miei genitori, dell'atteggiamento accusatorio di mio padre, che disapprova che lei veda un uomo o l'altro e che le impartisce lezioni su come potrebbe migliorare la propria vita. Della gelosia di mia madre quando lei passa del tempo con mio padre. Mio padre che mi dice che Jill passa troppo tempo a letto, che mi dice di chiamarla, di darle un po' di energia. Chiedo consiglio a mio marito e, esasperata, guardo tutti e tre andare sempre peggio. Cerco di aiutarli, ma cerco anche di mantenermi a distanza. Una sera tardi, una volta che Jill è venuta a casa nostra per parlarci, io mi scuso e vado a letto. Mio marito è impegnato in una conversazione con lei e io sono troppo stanca per continuare. Dopo un po' mi sveglio e scopro che lui non è a letto con me. Mi metto addosso all'accappatoio e mi preparo a raggiungere lui e Jill in salotto. Mentre mi avvicino, sento la risata sensuale di mia sorella. Non mi piace, perciò mi fermo ad ascoltare quello che dice, per vedere se la mia premonizione è vera. Lo è. Sta flirtando con mio marito. In quel momento vedo chiaramente che è pericolosa e che non riesce a controllarsi. Le sbatto la porta del mio cuore in faccia. Entro in salotto, la minaccio, le dico di andarsene, le dico di lasciare stare mio marito. Quello che è venuto fuori fino a questo momento, mi dice mia madre un giorno, dopo una seduta di terapia familiare, è che eravamo una famiglia felice e unita. Quello che non è venuto fuori, penso, tra me e me, è la violenza. Mi vedo a 14 anni che corro via dopo una lite furibonda con mio padre per il fatto che la sera prima sono tornata tardi. Lui prende un coltello e mi minaccia. Io scappo via dalla porta principale, sicura che stia cercando di uccidermi. Mi sento soffocare mentre mi precipito giù per la strada, i lembi della camicia al vento, e mi chiedo dove andrò. Insegno a tempo pieno alla Hunter College, sto finendo 2 libri, tirando su 2 figli adolescenti. Non ho tempo per tutto questo, mi dico. Quanto vorrei che mi lasciassero in pace. Sono completamente esausta dal tentativo di soddisfare i bisogni di tutti, scrivo. Credo di essere riuscita a rimanere sana di mente mantenendomi a distanza dalla mia famiglia. Non voglio essere risucchiata nella loro orbita. È troppo pericoloso per me. A volte sento che sto vivendo la vita di mia madre, non la mia, o la versione di mia madre di ciò che dovrebbe essere la mia vita. La mia battaglia contro la depressione è una lotta senza fine che finalmente sto vincendo, o almeno così credo, grazie all'aiuto di una splendida psicologa. So che ho bisogno di aiuto quando sono così infelice che non riesco ad alzarmi dal letto. Quando mi trovo in mezzo a una strada di New York, in piedi di fronte a una macchina e non so come ci sono finita. Quando vedo mio figlio, Justin, cadere dall'altalena del nostro giardino e non riesco a precipitarmi fuori ad aiutarlo. quando mi spingo a lavorare sempre di più, quando sto già lavorando più di quanto dovrei, quando comincio a piangere senza motivo, quando non riesco a dormire, quando scopro che sto diventando sessualmente provocante con chiunque, ossessionata dall'idea di avere una relazione come non si è mai vista, di amare e di perdere, anche se so che se questo dovesse accadere, causerebbe ancora più problemi, metterebbe in pericolo il mio matrimonio, comprometterebbe il benessere dei miei figli. Nelle prime settimane di dicembre, l'umore di mia sorella è fortemente vacillante. Gli alti e bassi si fanno sempre più frequenti. È depressa e non riesce ad alzarsi dal letto. Poi passa una giornata fantastica. Incontra un uomo e subito le piace. Le piace così tanto che pensa che forse lo sposerà. Trova un lavoro. Mi chiede come sto e sembra che per la prima volta dopo mesi le interessi davvero. Poi l'uomo la delude e lei è molto depressa. A metà dicembre mia madre sta molto male. Si fa ricoverare nel reparto psichiatrico dell'ospedale di zona. Mia sorella mi dà la sua opinione sul fatto che mia madre stia sempre peggio. Lo fa per farmela pagare. Io ascolto. Mi chiedo se Jill stia esagerando. Ciò che sta accadendo a mia madre e a mia sorella è collegato in una qualche modalità pericolosa che preferisco non capire. Prima di decidere di impazzire, dice mia sorella, lei scrive il menù per Natale e fa la lista della spesa, controlla l'estratto conto e lascia un appunto di tutto quello che bisogna pagare. Mia madre trova anche e legge tutta la posta di mia sorella. Legge le lettere spinte che mia sorella riceve da un amante mentre è sposata. Dopo, secondo quanto dice mia sorella, comincia a ingoiare Valium, va a letto e si rifiuta di alzarsi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra and Chiara. That was extraordinary. I just, Katia wrote on chat the effect of actually hearing people read aloud. I mean, it is a different experience. So your voices, I am so grateful for them and for this other layer they added to Louise's voice. Last year, at an event that we went just right before the pandemic, Anna Zillotto said these words that now that I think about them really become even more poignant, given what would happen in the months to come. She said that Louise DeSalvo taught her how to breathe. So something that is, is quite significant these days when we go around masks and afraid to breathe. So I'm really happy to have my old friend Anna Zillotto here with us, and she will be reading from Breathless. Welcome, Annie.
Vijay, thank you for having me here, and grazie Leotique. And yeah, I'm reading from Breathless. When Vijay brought me to Louise's house, I noticed this giant air filter, and I'm asthmatic, so I was very impressed. And I said, this is a woman who knows how to take care of herself. How can I do that? And Louise gave me this book and talked to me about breathing. So here's the final pages of Breathless. Inhale, drown, cough, cough, splutter, cough, force the exhale, better. Why should I have to take responsibility for my asthma? How can I personally take responsibility for assuring the purity of the air I breathe? I see the perniciousness of the word recovery, for it suggests that the illness or condition, asthma, whatever, is over, though it isn't. It suggests too that people are personally responsible for curing their illnesses. I realize that I'm against the neatness and the lie of what I recognize as the comforting arc of recovery narratives. The narrative that says, in essence, I was sick, I suffered, I did this and that and the other thing, I figured it out, I made changes, I'm now much better. Don't worry. There's nothing urgent we really need to do as a people to help prevent asthma. Every asthmatic can take personal responsibility for their recovery. In the true American tradition of Benjamin Franklin, I, the imperfect asthmatic, try to improve myself. And lo and behold, I succeed and I make myself over, I cure myself. And I am a much, much better person for it. Because of my ordeal, I have discovered inner peace, my own strength, things I never knew before, a community of likewise afflicted people. Because of my ordeal, I have entered the morally superior realm of people who are in recovery. And I could look down my nose at all of those morally inferior poor slobs out there, still suffering from this or from that, who haven't had the will, strength, grit, gumption, desire to accomplish what I have accomplished. In fact, if I didn't have asthma, I would go out and find a way to get asthma, because having asthma and recovering from it was such an amazingly important learning experience. Still, the next time someone asks me how I am, I find myself unable to fracture the form of this by now comfortable narrative and tell my story in the most subversive, hostile, irritating way I can. For I realize that the story people want to hear from me about my illness is a story that will make them feel better. I only hope that the story I tell here, at least in part, isn't that story. I must admit, though, that during the months I am writing Breathless, I have been taking less medicine. I have been breathing more easily. Before I got asthma, my sentences were long as Virginia Woolf's. They went on for the better part of a paragraph. They contained lots of dependent clauses, lots of semicolons. After I got asthma, I start writing very short sentences. Then I start fracturing my sentences, like this. A friend tells me that my new way of writing is driving her so crazy, she can't read my stuff anymore. I sound like a moron, a sixth grader. Can I please go back to writing the way I used to? For a couple of days, I try to pull some sentences together, try semicolons, my by now unfamiliar friend. But it's impossible. My body, my breathing are different. So my writing is different. I'm not the same self I once was, not the self who could take in enough air to exhale long, deep, complex sentences. These sentences that chop and sputter their way through space are the only ones I can now write. It's 11 p.m. I'm lying awake in bed, alone. I think that I am going to die. I can't catch my breath. I feel like I am suffocated, like I am trying to draw in air through the tiniest of straws, as if I'm trying to breathe through a room full of sodden feathers. I feel that I am drowning. I have the telephone number of the police plugged into my portable phone so that I could get help by hitting the send button. I try not to panic. Panic will only make it worse. I put on the earphones on my Walkman, listen to a relaxation tape. Lie down now. Make yourself very, very comfortable. Relax your face. Relax your neck. Relax your shoulders. Concentrate on your breathing. I listened to the tape 3 times. By the third go round, I am relaxed enough to drift off to sleep. Tonight, I am lucky, I tell myself. Tonight, it worked. But what about tomorrow? Thanks, Louise.
Thank you so much, Annie. It was fabulous. Angel Eduardo is a writer studied hunter, and also an incredible photographer, and his images are on the cover of Personal Effects, a book on Louise DeSalvo, and also Casting Off. And he will be reading from Chasing Ghosts, one of Louise's last books, an extraordinary book that is an illustration of how rich memory is as a genre, and how you write multiple memoirs. And just to read the Combat Zones, which is where we started our reading, and then to listen from Chasing Ghosts, a memoir about her father, I think will be a remarkable experience. Angel.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Eddie keeps putting me in the unenviable position of following Annie Lanzalato, and I'm starting to think she's doing it on purpose. But I have Louise's work to work with, so it's not that hard this time. I met Louise in Eddie's living room. Eddie introduced us and said some nice things about me, and the first thing Louise said was, "Are you writing? What are you writing? When do you write? How often do you write? What's your writing schedule like?" I couldn't get a word in. And so I think that encapsulates Louise's focus, her level of focus and her level of interest in the process and in the writing. And I wasn't lucky enough to have a class with Louise, but I think, like many, if not all of you, I count myself as a student of Louise's, even though I didn't get the chance to actually sit in a class. And so much of her writing is about writing, and so much of her work is about the work. And I think that resonates with me so much as someone who is trying to do and be what Louise was and is. And I'm reading from Chasing Ghosts, where she writes about her father, and also she writes about the writing about her father, which is a process that I can relate to very deeply, as someone who is also writing about his father. So this section in particular, called Coming Home, towards the end of the book, really speaks to me and the process and the way that distilling your life into writing can be a process, and how much of a process it really is. So this is called Coming Home. 2004 to 2014. Although it takes me years to write about how my father left for the war, the first words I write for this book are the ones about my father coming home from the war. And it's only when I revisit all the work I've written that I find I've penned at least 7 versions of this moment in my father's life. So that I must conclude that the story of how my father came home from the war is the one that I needed to tell myself over and over again. That I needed to tell myself this story because the loss of my father, both during the war and after he came home, was so very great. But what I find curious about all these versions is that I tell them not from my point of view, but from my father's. It's as if I need to imagine what it must have been like for him to come home, because if I can figure this out, then I can figure out what went wrong between us. Once I ask him. It's a few weeks before he destroys the house he's sharing with his second wife. He isn't well, but he isn't yet crazy. What was it like to come home from the war? I ask. I hope he'll tell me something helpful, something that'll help me understand him, something I can use for the book I'm writing about him. His eyes are blank. He stares down at his stained trousers, looks outside the window at the leaves on the ground that he can no longer clear away. What war are you talking about? He says. And when I tell him it's World War II I'm talking about, and tease him that he isn't old enough to have come home from the Great War, or young enough to have come home from the Korean War, or the Vietnam War, or Desert Storm, or the invasion of Iraq, he sighs and said, "Oh, of course, World War II. Your father is getting to be a very old man." This is the first time my father can't remember when something happened. The next time I ask my father about what it was like to come home, he tells me about what happened on the island where he was stationed after the war was over, about how pissed off he was that he had to wait 4 months after Japan surrendered to come home, about how he came home by ship and railroad, about the presents he brought home for me. But he doesn't tell me what I want to learn, what it felt like for him to come home. So then, this is what I write. This is how I imagine my father coming home from the war. For if I want to know what it was like for him to come home from the war in the Pacific, I must imagine it, piece the scene together from the bits and pieces of the stories my father has told me, from the details I've remembered, even from those I've misremembered, and then fill in the blanks with the details of my own invention based upon what I know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angel. That was beautiful. Please stay with us. We have the last 3 readings, so we're gonna go just a few minutes over our time. So I want to invite now all the writers from Leotique to do a brief choral reading.
Yes, for this last slot, we will read all together, the 4 of us. We think Louise's voice can be the voice of every woman. Thank you. From Personal Effects. Effetti personali. Autunno 1990. Subito dopo la morte di mia madre, mio padre mi dà una piccola busta da lettera. L'aveva trovata in un angolino del comodi mia madre. Sta riordinando le sue cose, sta facendo un pacco con le cose che vuole donare, secondo il desiderio di mia madre, al centro di violenza per le donne che sta qui vicino. Voleva che questa l'avessi tu, mi dice mio padre mentre mi dà la busta. La guardo. Nell'angolo a destra in basso, mia madre ha scritto il mio nome con mano malferma. Quando vedo la sua scrittura, so che deve essere messo insieme a questo pacchetto per me quando stava per morire. Prima di entrare in ospedale, quando sente che le forze le stanno abbandonando rapidamente, anche se non ci dice mai che ha paura di stare per morire. Non ci dice mai che ha cominciato a cadere, che le cadono le cose di mano. Leggere quello che c'è qui dentro ti dirà molte cose su tua madre, mi dice mio padre. Arrabbiata per il fatto che lui ovviamente ha letto il contenuto della busta, ma troppo stanca per tirare fuori con lui di nuovo il tema della discrezione, gli dico che naturalmente leggerò quello che la busta contiene. Mento. So, ma non posso dirlo, che non sono pronta per leggere quale che sia l'ultimo messaggio che mia madre mi ha lasciato. Che forse non sarò mai pronta. Questo mio padre non lo capirebbe.
Dopo che mio padre se ne va, guardo la scrittura con più attenzione. La esamino come farei con la scrittura di un'autrice su cui sto facendo ricerca. Cerco di determinare dall'aspetto quando di preciso mia madre abbia scarabocchiato il mio nome. Mi ricordo che nei suoi ultimi mesi di vita mia madre ha scarabocchiato qualcosa su una cartolina che io le avevo spedito da Barcellona e che la grafia di questa busta potrebbe essere uguale a quella. Se combacia, allora saprò quando l'ha scritta. Determinare con precisione quando lei abbia preparato questa busta diventa per me un fatto di estrema importanza. Mi dà qualcosa da fare, qualcosa che non sia aprire la busta ed esaminare il contenuto, qualcosa che non sia leggere il suo ultimo messaggio. Dopo la morte di mia madre, mentre esaminavo i suoi effetti personali, ho trovato una cartolina in una scatola sul ripiano della vecchia Singer che mia madre usava come scrivania, insieme a lettere di amiche, bollette che aveva pagato, un estratto conto bancario che aveva controllato. Corro giù in cantina e frugo in uno scatolone dove ho ammucchiato in fretta queste e altre cose. Io e mia madre avevamo litigato per il fatto che stava andando a una conferenza di scrittrici a Barcellona per 5 giorni durante il mio anno sabbatico, l'unico viaggio che abbia fatto durante il mio congedo dall'Hunter College. Scrivevo costantemente, desideravo una vacanza, credevo di meritarmela. Devi proprio andare? Chiede mia madre quando le dico dei miei progetti. Non devo andare, voglio andare, le rispondo aspra. Questa è la risposta che do ogni volta che scoppia una lite sui miei viaggi, sulla mia vita. Lei disapprovava il fatto che io facessi un dottorato, che lasciassi i bambini. Lei disapprovava che andassi in giro a divertirmi, come diceva, che andassi fuori a cena con amici senza mio marito, che viaggiassi da sola. Non era pensava lei, il modo di comportarsi di una donna sposata con i figli.
Quando mi chiede se devo andare a Barcellona, mia madre non mi dice che si sente male. Non mi dice di rimanere a casa perché ha paura che le succederà qualcosa mentre sono via. Sono così presa dalla mia vita che non noto che lei ha un aspetto più fragile, più debole, che la sua pelle è più pallida. Giugno 1990. Louise a Barcellona. Provo un senso di vergogna quando guardo l'annotazione che mia madre ha scritto sulla cartolina che non mi sono neanche preoccupata di firmare, che ho scritto in tutta fretta prima di correre fuori nella luce magica di una domenica mattina presto a Barcellona. Questa cartolina che ho scritto di malavoglia, senza pensarci, aveva significato così tanto per mia madre che l'aveva conservata, datata. E la grafia è la stessa della grafia della busta, non così distorta come quella di subito prima che andassi in ospedale, non così lucida come la sua grafia di marzo, aprile, maggio. Sicuramente l'aveva preparata per me più o meno nel periodo in cui ero lontana. Dopo 2 mesi e mezzo mia madre sarebbe morta. Devo aver sospettato che stava per morire. Se no perché, pensavo, avrebbe fatto tutto questo? Mi congratulo con me stessa per questo lavoro da detective, ma non sono pronta lo stesso, quindi prendo una cartellina e ci metto dentro la busta con sull'etichetta: famiglia, mamma, ricordi. Un giorno o l'altro, mi dico, la leggerò. Un giorno o l'altro, ma non ora. La porto giù in cantina, la metto in un armadietto e me ne dimentico fino a 4 anni più tardi, quando la trovo fuori posto mentre sto cercando un vecchio contratto in un cassetto. 1 anno dopo il suicidio di mia sorella, mia madre mi chiama, tremante. Stava attraversando la strada per imbucare una lettera a un'amica. La cosa successiva di cui si è resa conto è che era ferma sulla traiettoria di una macchina in arrivo, incapace di muoversi.
La macchina aveva inchiodato e si era fermata a 1 metro da lei. Quello che guidava aveva abbassato il finestrino, le aveva urlato. Avrebbe potuto ucciderla, le aveva detto. Come devo prendere questo episodio? Mi chiede. Le dico che è una cosa seria. Le dico che la porterò dal suo psichiatra. Però non sono sorpresa. Quindi quando qualche mese prima della sua morte mia madre per caso mi dice che quando il dottore le ha consigliato di non prendere più una delle molte pillole che stava prendendo per una malattia cronica, lei non ha capito e ha smesso di prenderle tutte. Mi chiedo se abbia di nuovo tendenze suicide. Negli anni che sono passati dalla morte di mia sorella, il dolore di mia madre è chiaramente visibile, onnipresente. Non si gode più i miei figli, non si gode più le nostre riunioni di famiglia, non si gode più nulla. Ha la bocca perennemente all'ingiù, è accigliata. Quando facciamo qualche foto di famiglia, si sforza di sorridere, si tira su tutti i giorni e cerca di fare le cose quotidiane, di vivere. Ma mia madre non è più con noi, è con Jill. Una volta, dopo che siamo stati tutti insieme, chiedo a un'amica come trovi mia madre. Vuoi la verità? Mi chiede. La verità, rispondo. Sembra uno zombie, mi dice la mia amica. E ha ragione. Dal suicidio di mia sorella, mia madre è andata sempre più alla deriva, lontano da noi, ed è scivolata nel mondo sotterraneo della memoria. Quando mia sorella si è uccisa, si è portata dietro mia madre per farle compagnia. Ora, quando vedo mia madre, lei spesso comincia la conversazione con una riflessione su mia sorella e raramente mi chiede come sto. I suoi conti, i documenti, erano tutti così ben ordinati quando li ho ricevuti, mi dice mia madre. Aveva perfino controllato l'estratto conto. C'erano centinaia di persone nella cappella il giorno del funerale. La amavano in molti. Rileggo le lettere di Jill, una cosa che non ho fatto da quando le ho messe a posto dopo la sua morte. Ora che le leggo, dopo quello che ha detto mia suocera, queste lettere raccontano una storia molto dolorosa. Senza dettagli specifici, alludono a urla al telefono, periodacci, litigate, al comportamento di suo marito che la spaventa, al fatto che lui non sia mai in pace con se stesso, ai grandi problemi che devono affrontare, all'inizio di una terapia, la fine di una terapia, le minacce di separazione, la sua parte di colpa, al fatto che lei cercasse di far funzionare il matrimonio, di non provocare il marito, di credere di non essere responsabile per il comportamento del marito, al fatto che lei si sentisse così inadeguata, incompetente, indegna di essere amata, così depressa da essere quasi catatonica. Sono seduta in mezzo alle lettere di mia sorella, scritte su fogli di carta gialla, rosa, bianca, celeste e a fiori. Siccome sono una critica letteraria, riesco sempre a leggere tra le righe, a trovare la storia che si nasconde dietro la storia.
Thank you so much. That was truly exquisite. I want a whole book recording of Vertigo with your voices. Louise would return to the story of her sister's suicide towards the end, and she was working on a book on that. And Sango Hire, our next reader, who had the good fortune of being one of those lucky ones who sat in one of Louise's class. And I'm so grateful to count her among my friends and one of the writers whose writing I get to see weekly in one of my writers group. She will be reading from a book, which was also a book of ending, The House of Early Sorrows, book of endings and beginnings, where Louise returned to those early pieces that then evolved into many of the books that she published. Thank you for being with us, Sandra. Welcome.
Thank you, Eddie. What a beautiful afternoon. I had the great honor of studying with Louise in the MFA memoir program that she founded at Hunter College. You know, there she shared with us her really generous and brilliant understanding of the art of memoir and the creative process behind it. I'm going to read from the prologue of The House of Early Sorrows, her memoir and essays, and the passage I'm going to read, I believe, is kind of her memoir manifesto. But how do you tell the story of a people who don't want to remember, who often don't tell you what they recall, or if they do, speak in puzzles, riddles, enigmas, stories that seem to be about others, but that are really about themselves? How do you find their stories? And you must find them, because the stories people try to forget are the most important stories, the ones that must be recorded, the ones history has buried or ignored or erased, the ones memoirists must tell. Memoir, then, is a corrective to history. All a memoirist of people who led obscure lives can do, all I can do, is try to imagine their lives from the few shreds of evidence left behind, to represent them, to re-present them to readers, to imagine what their lives might have been like given the little that is known about them, to try to ascertain the significance of their lives, to accord them a little gift of time, remembrance, respect, and yes, to try to ensure that their deaths do not erase the meaning and significance of their lives. I am the only one of my family who is still alive, the only one left, and so the only one who can do this work of remembering. Yes, others could, but who would want to? Who else would want to spend time writing about a man who worked on the railroad, who left behind him when he died nothing more than a box filled with long underwear, a pass allowing him to ride the railroad free on certain times, on certain lines, his naturalization papers, a wife, a daughter, a granddaughter who loved him, and a little more. To some, an insignificant man, and so not worthy of having his life recounted. Who would want to spend time writing about a woman who was a superintendent of a tenement in Hoboken, New Jersey, who, when she was forced to move to the suburbs, spent the rest of her life sitting in a corner knitting and crocheting and protecting her granddaughter from her father's rages? Who else would write about a woman with dreams of being a writer so often felled by depression and despair, who sold shoes at W.T. Grant's in Hoboken? Of a man who was no hero and yet torn asunder by war, who had grand dreams but who was forced to abandon them. Of a sister, a post-war child whose parents had so little to give her after the war that years later, for this and for other reasons, she killed herself. The work of understanding the lives of my family is, as Paul Auster has said, condemned to futility. Still, I must try. And though I try to understand people who cannot be understood, not to try to understand them would be far more futile than the futile act of trying. And to try to understand their lives is to begin to understand the lives of so many like them. As a memoirist, I write about what was, what might have been, what could have been, for memoir must also be about desires unfulfilled in a culture that does not seem to honor, but instead often deliberately attempts to squelch the aspirations of the poor and the outsider. I write about people now long dead who can no longer share the facts of their lives or their memories with me. Memoir writes what has vanished and will never return. And perhaps the memoirist engages in this futile task to try to bring that time back, to try to understand it, and through that understanding, to give meaning to what was heretofore inchoate. And through giving meaning to other people's lives, to give meaning to our own. Still, memoir writes what has vanished and will never return. So in this sense, every memoirist is a ghostwriter, a writer who chases ghosts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was perfect and also a perfect preface to the next and last reading. I hope that one of the things that this reading, this gathering shows is first just the extraordinary richness and of Louise DeSalvo's work, but also really the sense of the relationships that she and the work forged, and they are ongoing, and they will continue to grow. This last writer will read a very special piece, and I would like to give Jonathan Freeman Coppage actually the opportunity to tell us a little bit about how this piece came to be published. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Eddie. Thanks to all today's readers, and Eddie for organizing this celebration of Louise's legacy and for inviting me to be a part of it. I met Louise in Panzano in Chianti in April 2005. We were just a couple Americans wandering the empty streets during siesta. I was a junior in college, and she was everything I wanted to be: well-traveled, urbane, a writer, and a teacher. Over the next 13 years, our friendship developed by correspondence. When I came out as queer, writing as a way of healing gave me a roadmap to wholeness. When I was trying to decide on graduate school, her phone calls steered me true. When I became a parent, her wise emails walked me through the hard times. When I started a new literary journal called Oyster River Pages in 2017, Louise asked if she could send us something to publish. To me, there is no greater honor than publishing an essay by one of my literary heroes. That essay, entitled Sweets, was published in our August 2018 issue. And though I didn't know it at the time, it turned out to be, I think, Louise's last living publication. I'm putting a link to the full essay in the chat right now, and I'm honored to read an excerpt of it today. The essay, narrated in third person, tells of a bittersweet morning Louise shared with Ernie at a cafe in Ocean Grove, New Jersey. As they sat and rested in Ocean Grove, the litter of their uneaten food on the table, she brightened when she noticed that the formerly derelict building opposite was being rehabilitated, its Victorian tracery now painted in accents of mauve, purple, and green. "Look," she told him, "that place across the street that was such a wreck. Look at it now. They've completely renovated it, and there will be shops on the ground floor and apartments up top. And look at how nicely they've painted it." He couldn't understand her fascination with house renovations, with home improvements, couldn't understand how at the end of the day before they made dinner, she'd sit with her knitting and watch one rehab show after another on TV. The one with the cute couple from Texas who made her laugh. The one with the cute couple from California who were getting divorced but still working together. The one with the twin brothers from Canada who wore tight jeans. Before she got sick, she wasn't like this. Wouldn't dream of wasting her time watching the stars of these shows, gutting houses and putting them back together again, far more beautiful than they had been before. And he had to admit that they worked wonders on these wrecks of houses. And when he asked her what her obsession with these shows was all about, she only said, I love to see what they do to them, love to see how beautiful they turn out. And they couldn't begin cooking until she saw what he learned was the reveal, the moment when the owners were allowed to see the renovated house for the first time, as if, he said, as if they'd never seen it in progress. What bullshit. She had to agree. She learned some terms of the trade. Demo day, full gut, complete rewire, cosmetic changes, structural issues, footings, load-bearing wall. And she'd make him laugh by shouting into the kitchen where he was prepping their vegetables to tell him that the particular house she was watching being renovated required a complete rewire. And they'd both groan and say in unison, what's that going to cost? The way the owners of the house or the stars of the show always ask the contractors. What he doesn't know and what she doesn't tell him is that every decrepit house that's transformed lets her pretend that something like that could happen to her. She's had recurring dreams about people renovating her body, one in which the cute couple from Texas come into her home to perform a full gut on her. And on demo day, they take out all the diseased parts of her body and throw them into the dumpster in her driveway. And they ask her what special features she would like in her new and improved body. And she tells them nothing special, just something that functions well, that she'd like to walk without getting dizzy. And if they could do something about the sores on her feet, she'd be grateful. She'd like them to return to a healthy shade of pinko gray, which is what her anthropology professor taught her was the real color of the so-called white race. And they tell her not to worry, to leave it all to them. And when she awakens, they have done more than what she's asked, and she has nothing at all wrong with her. She's as good as new. No, she's better than new. And they tell her this new improved body will last her a lifetime. She no longer has anything to worry about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I don't think anyone has ever read that piece in public, so it's really meaningful that we come to the close of this event with, as close as to Louise's last words. In the years to come, there is going to be a lot of Louise DeSalvo's work. I'm committing myself to do this birthday celebration yearly event, and I hope many of you will join me. Ben and I already talked about a Virginia Woolf and Louise DeSalvo event for 2023, and I really would like to start thinking for a calendar of Louise DeSalvo events. I want to thank, we ran out of time clearly, but I'm really glad to see that there has been a lively exchange on chat. And if anything, this is an indication that there is a lot that we want to share about this fantastic writer and human being. My deepest gratitude to the NJCU Center for the Arts for always providing a home for events such as this, to Leotique for this fantastic collaboration that the many may follow, and to all the writers who have read and the audience that are shared. Also, Fordham University publisher, which has published the collection of essays that Nancy and I edited on Louise's personal effects, and Louise's last book is offering a 30% discount to anybody who attended the event. And if you need me to send the flyer, I'm posting my email and I can send it to you. Thank you so much, everyone. And until next time, Stephanie.
Thank you so very much, Eddie and Donia and Deborah and you amazing writers and readers. It's just been glorious today. Happy birthday, Louise, and happy birthday, Deborah. What a glorious day. We have a whole great year of amazing programming coming up, so please visit us at njcu.edu/arts to find out all the things that are happening and join us again. I want to thank Anna Carhart, our theater manager, Justin Tinker, our technical director, and Sabrina Sabalo, our box office manager and Zoom coordinator, for just rocking it, making this happen. Thank you so much. I also want to give a little shout out for NJCU students, alumni, and staff. Until the 1st of October, you have the opportunity to enter the call for submissions that the Exchange Place Alliance is having for original quotes of poetry or literature that will be placed on benches downtown in the Exchange Place Alliance footprint. So all that information is njcu.edu/arts. So thank you again for joining us. We hope you take this inspiration and keep writing amazing things yourselves.